everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Ghost Furnace. It is I, Bond, and I'm here with my cohort, Nick, Pennsylvania. How you doing, Nick?
Well, I'm doing real good today.
Good. That's what I like to hear. I'm in a good mood too. I'm in a good mood for a few reasons. One of those is that it is definitely fall. We got our first snow here in Western Pennsylvania a few days ago. So I'm kind of like getting into the season even more so. We just finished with Halloween. That was a lot of fun. Hope everyone out there had a good time. Got to enjoy themselves, be safe, and have some fun. But we are not slowing down here at the Ghost Furnace. First off, just a little bit of housekeeping. Like always, we do have a few interviews and few episodes scheduled for the rest of the month and the rest of the year at that. But if you have any stories or would like to reach out to us, please do so. We love getting feedback. It really gives us a good direction of where to go. And selfishly, it turns us on to newer things that we were not previously aware of. Because for how many articles Nick and I read and how many books we have, there is always something new.
I was going to say, speaking of books we have, so I have had a book in the works of which Bond took photos for and helped me with the audio for. So I have an accordion book that finally came out, which is way out of left field. But it so happens it was delivered. Bond had taken pictures of me some months ago for the book, and I was wearing a certain sweater that I was wearing when the book arrived and that I'm wearing now.
Yeah, so where can people find that book?
Oh, you can find it through Hal Leonard. You can find it through most music shops, but it's just finally a lot of busyness had been around that, and that was kind of why, in part, we were a little more sporadic with things there for a little bit.
Right. But
it was a big deal for me.
Yeah, that's a super
and therefore the world
accomplishment. Right. Yeah, for everybody. It's a big deal for everybody. Yeah.
Indeed.
But I mean, it was really nice anyone out there who does art or, does creates in any sense, seeing something from inception to product is always really exciting, and it feels good. And I'm really happy and proud of you, Nick. Just want to say that on the record.
Well, I thank you because I know you helped a lot with getting that to happen.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it was.
I owe you at least one dinner. I get that first royalty check. Bam.
There we go. But yeah. So speaking of exciting things, we have two things for you all tonight. The first thing is Bigfoot story, which back in the last month, I feel like we were really ghost and paranormal heavy, and so it's going to be good to get back into the cryptid mindset. And then we also have a email from one of our listeners, so really excited to get into both of those things. So Nick, want to talk about this Bigfoot thing?
Sure. I cannot wait to share this with you. This was something that happened only back in early October. It was, now I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar with this, but there was a couple, we'll call them Shannon and Stetson, because that is their names and this is public information. Basically, they were in San Juan County on a narrow gauge rail line, like an excursion train between Durango and Silverton.
I think we talked about this already.
Did we? Because I have video of it. Can you hear the sound, by the way?
No, you know what, dude? This was I actually can't hear the sound, but I know it's them talking. You know what? It is. This was on a episode of Where Did the Road Go? And I thought it was us in my head.
That's amazing.
I was just because it was one of the roundtable episodes, so it was like a bunch of people that I appreciate just sitting around BSing about this video, and in my head I was like, oh, I was there. And you must.
I don't think you should cut any of this. You should just leave all of this in here. But have you seen this video?
I have. Yes, I am familiar with it. Yeah.
So those of you who are not familiar with it, you can obviously maybe we can post a link. This was
we can yes because it's pretty popular. Yeah.
Yeah, and I knew we hadn't talked about it because I feel like this would have captured my attention, especially with there was being a video.
For sure.
I am really curious as to what's your take. I'm going to get over here and zoom in.
Yeah.
And there we have it. Now, you're saying you thought it was a shiny Bigfoot suit. I could see it being a man in a ghillie suit.
Or ghillie suit, yeah. It's one of those things. Yeah. For those of you who haven't seen the video, like I said, I will have a link to this YouTube video in the show notes. So do not do this while you're driving or anything, but please watch the video because again, it's at least, it's one of those things where I think some people see this stuff immediately and they go, oh, wow, a Bigfoot. And other people go, oh, wow, not a Bigfoot. Like, I don't know if too many people are on the fence with this one. My initial reaction is it is someone in a suit because to me it looks shiny. It looks like a suit to me.
Well, in the couple too, they said that they were looking for elk when they were looking outside the window, and so I don't know what the seasons are on elk out there, or if there's any sort of hunting open right now in southwestern Colorado. I could very much easily imagine it just being a hunter. Now, having said that, I find it weird that he would be by himself. It seems like he is. Maybe there's somebody up around that was just out of sight of these people. But, when you're going hunting for something larger than a deer, you're going to have at least another person with you. And when you're going into such a desolate area, I figured, too, you would have somebody with you.
Right. And from a little bit of research I did in this video when it came out a little bit ago. And again, when I said, let me qualify that. When I say research, I mean reading articles and people's opinions on like Discord and Instagram. To be clear,
research.
Research, yeah. Like I want to try to be more clear.
No test tubes involved.
Yeah, but a lot of folks that I was seeing, it's one of those things. I think people get split on this kind of thing very, very easily, and I heard everything from this trip had like a paranormal element to it, and these people were on like a train like that. Again, don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, then it is almost certainly bunk.
Sure. Real quickly though, what paranormal? I mean, maybe it was early in the ride. What paranormal train trip is going to be when it's bright and sunny outside?
I think it was like for like a ghost town or something like that. I thought I saw someone say.
Well, then I wouldn't even call that paranormal.
Yeah, I know yeah. So yeah, I don't know enough about the setting to accurately comment on it. But that being said, I at least for me with a lot of paranormal stuff, half of the fun is seeing how people react to it and seeing like what that says about different things. And myself included, given a little bit of context that the video gives us, the people on the train, the couple talking and everything. What I will say is they do sound genuinely surprised, from like just a sense motive standpoint.
Well, and clearly more than just this couple. Like, I think if this couple were hoaxing it, you wouldn't hear other people
everybody
on the train
else
in the audio.
Right.
Yeah. It seems like quite a few people were engaged.
Right. Yeah. So I don't think that the folks in the on the train were being dishonest or not above board. Again, when you guys watch the video, you'll see that it looks like the suit is like shiny, has kind of like long hair, it just kind of walks and then like crouches down kind of. I mean, crouching is primate behavior, if we want to say the whole flesh and blood thing, but it doesn't move or look like an animal to me. And maybe some people would say, well, that's because it's not. It's because it's so close to a human, but it doesn't pass the eye test for me.
I find it, it definitely is a really intriguing bit of video, but if you told me, hey, it's a guy in like a ghillie suit or something like that, or just an outdoors camouflage, I could very quickly and very easily believe that. I too don't think it's a Bigfoot. I just think it's a super interesting video. I don't even think it's a hoax. I think it's a thing of mistaken identity. Because
that's very possible too. Yeah.
If the people running the train, if it's a ghost town train, I don't see them doing this towards that end.
Mm-hmm.
We know people can do a hoax and it can gain some notoriety.
Right.
Or maybe it was just a lone actor, but I think more likely than not, this is probably a hunter, or maybe it's a poacher, and maybe the reason for the squatting down is because he realizes he's been seen. You know
what? I hadn't heard that take on it yet. That's a hot take right there.
Okay, well, coming
that's an interesting one. Yeah, right. But at the same time, again, I think that whenever videos like this come out, anything paranormal related, when there's a decent video, because what I will say is at least the quality of the video initially, it's still a cell phone, but it's not bad. I think anytime something like this comes out, it's important to talk about whether it is real or not, kind of thing. Because again, with a lot, we've talked about this before with evidence of the video nature. For folks who believe, they're going to believe, and folks who don't believe, they're probably not going to believe. Like I've never seen or heard of video changing someone's mind. I just think it's interesting.
Well, and I'll say that I actually, growing up, I always saw video as being more suspicious because
Right.
in so many of these sightings and whatnot, my first question is, why were you filming this in the first place?
Mhm.
Like, you just had the Panasonic right there.
Right.
And now within the, post 2007, 2008, with everybody having the smartphone in their pocket
Right.
and with the cameras getting increasingly better,
Right.
it's not as surprising to me that
Right.
there's video of it. So now I'm not as like, oh, this is clearly staged, because
Right.
why else would you have the video camera with you?
Right. And this is a perfect instance of that, I think. And again, that's a really interesting take. I don't think I've thought about that before. With something like this, you don't have to wonder, oh, why would they have been videotaping from a train in a scenic area? Like, of course, like,
Yeah, I mean,
people just
I
taking
can
videos
see
all the
people
time.
taking that, but
Right.
it's just
So-
but back in the 90s and the 80s and before,
very different.
there
Like-
was just so many times, right? Yeah, exactly. And even on a trip like this, especially going back to the mid and early 90s, I'd be
Mhm.
even less inclined to see someone bringing a camera. But again, a vacation's one thing. It was more about a lot of the other examples,
Right.
old videos that we've seen. It's like, why was this being filmed in the first? Then
Right.
you just happen to
Exactly.
candidly catch something. That automatically made it suspicious to me.
Right. And it's interesting because, like, speaking of like media, like convincing people, I remember there was a dude I knew in college, and I remember talking to him about paranormal stuff. Whenever we were chatting, he mentioned that he had a picture of a ghost, and he said that like he didn't believe in ghosts basically until he took this photo, kind of thing. And he was like, "Well, what else could that be?" And it was this photo. God, I wish I had this, because it was a photo of what looked like just like a farmhouse, and there was this like wispy white stuff near like the porch. Now, like in reality, could it have been like smoke or something or anything like that? Absolutely. It's hard to tell because it's an old like 800 speed photo. But this photo convinced this guy Ryan that like this was real. Like that was what kind of tipped him over. So I think media can be really important, but I think it's more like, is it important to you? Not so much is it valid or is it real?
Well, I remember there's a haunted cemetery around, and I think we've told the story before about it. And if we haven't, I'm sure it's in one of the Dr. Pennsylvanias out there about this haunted cemetery.
Mhm.
I remember our friends going, and this was in an era of Polaroid film.
Ooh, yeah.
It wasn't Polaroid that they used. It was just one of the disposable cameras. You take your shots, you put it in a bag, you drop it off at the pharmacy in the 1 hour photo.
Mhm.
Well, they had taken a bunch of photos, and it was around this time of the year. How would you describe it outside right now?
It's chilly. It's fall.
Chilly, yeah, brisk.
Yep.
We're getting frosts on the regular right now. In fact, on Wednesday, about 40 minutes north of here, got 10 inches of snow was the official count. Did you know that?
They got
10
that
inches.
much.
They got that much out on the
Wow.
Crawford-Venango border. That is
'Cause I
from
saw
the
part-
National
part-
Weather Service.
Yeah, because part of 80 was shut down on Wednesday.
That was due to a multi-car pileup, yeah.
Yeah, I believe it. Because I mean, yeah, I don't think people were ready for it.
So
on
it's chilly,
November
in other
1st, yep.
words. We're getting good snow and everything. And when you're outside at night taking photos, you don't realize that your breath is being picked up on those photos. And I remember my friends coming back and they're saying, look at this. Look at all this wispy stuff. It seems really spooky. And I said, yeah, but it's your breath. And you over there, guy, you're a chain smoker too. So it's more likely that's what's happening. You've got that camera up to your face, and it's almost in front of where your
mouth,
breath would
yeah.
start. Right, exactly. So it's a lot of that too. So Is it the medium? Well, the medium can fool you as well by some like
Right.
really mundane stuff. You wouldn't be standing around with a friend and breathing out in the chilly air and being like, "What is all this wispy smoke stuff?" But the
Right.
moment it's captured in a photo, you forget, oh yeah, it's chilly out and I was breathing right behind the camera.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's nuts because it's like I get why people like that stuff. And
Sure.
there is stuff that absolutely is strange. Like I mean, I'd love to do a whole episode on this sometime, especially with some of our photo friends we have out there. Are you familiar with the whole idea of the ghost writer? I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name back in like the 90s who would like ask questions, take Polaroid photos, and like answers would show up written on the Polaroids in
Oh,
like white smoke in the air. Does that
yeah,
ring
I
a
think I
bell?
remember hearing James Randi talk about this sort
Right.
of
Yeah.
thing.
So there was, I want to say it was an episode of Fact or Faked back in the day that like was basically like a Mythbusters for the paranormal. It was a really cool show. And I'm almost positive it was them that did an episode on that with like a bunch of photo experts. And they could get it so like it looked a little bit like it, but even using the same stuff and a bunch of different techniques, they couldn't get it to look exactly like it. So, because that's one of those stories that kind of like defies. It sounds like too crazy almost, but then when you see some of the photos and you see these experts trying to fake it, maybe that convinces some people, or at least introduces enough doubt that it opens them up to being a little more open minded about some of the stories. Maybe.
But again, it's just like, how do you come upon that? Like, how do you
Right.
find like that's the way? Oh, okay, I've tried
Right.
everything. I've tried asking a question and throwing a can of ragu at a brick wall and seeing if
Right.
the answer comes. No, I got to pose the question, take the Polaroid, and look for the answer in smoke.
Right.
It's just it or taking
That
if
part
I
doesn't
take a
line
bunch
up.
of
Yeah.
alphabets and throw them on the floor, it'll
Yeah.
say, well, it actually does. It gives a really haunting call of who. Then you
Right.
realize they were
Yeah.
Cheerios and
We're
blah blah
sure
blah
all
blah.
along. That's the
Ah.
yep. But
So it is, but there are some interesting things that come out of film, and
right.
even when like we've looked at spear photography,
Right.
we've played around with it
We have.
ourselves
Yep.
to have
Hmm.
fun,
Right.
and it is strange, and it does have this really creepy aesthetic. And
I
again, it
love the
is
aesthetic.
strange that you're
Absolutely.
looking at this sweaty woman with cheesecloth coming out of her
Right.
mouth.
Film in general, I think, has a bit of a mystique to it. Again, as much as I love digital photography, I really do love film. And I think that there is just a little bit more magic or romance or whatever to the idea of like light physically hitting the negatives and that chemical process. And it's like, okay, the photons that bounced off that thing that I was looking at are trapped here. So like it lends itself to the paranormal, I think, because it seems like it kind of bridges that gap a little bit.
It is funny to me because I think about this is going to be a lot of different thoughts wrapped into one. And I'll be brief because there's still the email to get to. But I think of like the Russian writer Nabokov
Right.
and the piece that he found in photo because he had been afraid of dying and he saw a photo of his family before he was born,
Mm-hmm.
before he existed, and it didn't scare him.
Mm-hmm.
And now for me, I look at old photos and it doesn't scare me, but it always gives me a sense of sadness
Right.
that I will never engage with these people, that I will never see them, that there are these tangible remnants of real times, places, and people that
Well,
are
yeah.
phantoms in a very real way. So it's, well, on one hand, it gives comfort to people like Nabokov,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously there's a solace to be gained. There's a consultation to be
Mm-hmm.
gained from that. It gives me sadness because these were real people, those old photos, and also that this same medium can also give us the consolation that everything will be fine whether you're there or not,
Or not. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yet it gives some consolation that there's something beyond because it's answering my questions right before I take the snapshot.
Right. Right. And I know we're a long way from like Bigfoot on the Colorado mountainside, but I think that when it comes to capturing anything, it's a form of control, right? it's a form of documentation, and because it has this ephemeral nature to it, especially photography, especially Polaroid photography, that stuff doesn't last very long. That feels more like ghosts. It feels more like magic, than digital stuff.
Yes.
And that very well might just be a product of the time or a product of our cultures or whatever.
And a
But I get
byproduct of our inability to fully understand how it works.
right,
You
and
you probably know about more about photography than 99% of people living, but
right, and
even
it's
then, for you to be able to make a camera from scratch.
right, exactly. Yeah. And so, but I think the idea of capturing stuff in general is interesting. And that goes back to what we always talk about here with like the mechanics of things, how the paranormal works. And it's us trying to, impose some sort of order on something that may in fact be orderless.
I think you could say that about a lot of things, but yeah,
Right.
I completely agree with you. The need to taxonomize.
Mm-hmm.
So let me get to this email. So this email actually comes from a certain Emily, who I
Ooh,
think you know.
I do.
Okay, well, she had emailed while we were recording our last episode, and then I walked out from being done with that, and she said, "How come you didn't read the email? She said you'd be better about checking these." And I said, "I don't check them while we're doing this." But
Maybe we should, just in case. Just in case.
there's a few things here, and there's even a question for you.
Ooh.
So she's got a spooky experience,
Oh, okay.
but it was inspired in part. So I'll ask her questions first. Brendan, you told the story of hearing Murphy,
Ooh,
seeing
yeah.
Murphy well after his death.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know if your parents or anyone else in the house have seen or heard him, and were they as attached to him as you were?
I'm not sure if they'd like me saying this or not, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So apologies. I know my dad has seen the cat. That's what he's told me, and I don't know if my mom has. I'll have to ask her, but she acts like I'm kind of crazy every time I'm like, why did the cat? Because it's so confusing. Like it's so like it's and that's how my dad was when he said he saw the cat too. It's just more like what's going. It's not scary. There's nothing
Right.
scary about it. But I mean, we had the cat for 18 years, so obviously my mom and dad were also pretty attached to it. It was definitely like he was my buddy, but he was definitely a family cat. So there definitely was a connection there, I think.
Well, let me move along in the email. Okay, here's one of her stories. As a child, we had a cat named Biddy. Actually, his name was Mr. Whiskers, but we called him Biddy for some reason. I think that's important to know.
Okay, yep,
He looked exactly like the cat in Pet Cemetery.
church.
So he was an
Yeah.
indoor-outdoor cat and was rather old by this point. One day he went off and he didn't come back. Our mom told us that cats do that. They want to be alone when they die, and it must have been his time.
Yeah.
So we mourned our cat. That seemed like a good explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But one day he came back. It was about a week after he went missing. We ran into the house to bring him food and water. When we returned, he was gone again. My sister and I then realized, looking back, that he had flies on his face, and he did not look alive. It sort of feels like the Bob incident. But he came back to make sure that we knew he didn't leave because he didn't love us, but because he wasn't well and it was his time.
Oh my God, that's wild.
Yeah. I've heard this
Jeez.
story from her a few times.
Jeez. No, I believe it. Ugh, that's devastating. It's like again, every other animal lover out there, I think, will agree with at least part of the statement. But like, there's definitely something to the connection that people have with animals, no matter whether it's cat or dog or horse or whatever. There is a connection that is, it's special. There's no other way around it, or no other way to say it. And the idea of a cat coming back to just be like, hey, just so you know, I didn't leave because I didn't care about you. That's such like a beautiful story. It's creepy as hell. It's creepy, but I think it's more beautiful than creepy. But man, the idea that it had like flies around its face and stuff like that is just like, yeah, it's very Pet Cemetery. it's interesting too that they both had the experience.
Yes.
So like, I mean, and it sounds like they both had the same reaction of like, oh, this is a real cat. We need to go get it food. Like, so it wasn't like it was some like ethereal moment,
Right.
and it doesn't sound like it was that terribly fleeting either because they went to get stuff, so like, oh, that's weird. And I mean,
Hmm.
no, not weird about it. That's I've never heard a story like that. That's that's a new one.
Well,
Because if it came
she'll be
back, it
excited
looked,
to hear that.
yeah. Because if it came, because I think that I've heard stories about people seeing their animals, like obviously like myself, but also the fact that they had the impression or interpretation of the event as it being the cat that was. I'm sorry, what was the cat's name? What was the cat's Christian name? Mr. Biddy's?
Mr. Whiskers,
Mr.
aka
Whiskers.
Biddy.
Biddy. Okay. So the fact that they felt that the cat was coming back for like that purpose, not just like, oh, it happens to be a cat again. Like that's different than like a residual haunting or the whole stone tape thing that we talk about. It sounds very purposeful. But the flies are a weird, that's the wrinkle in this story that like really kind of shakes me up a little bit because
Well, it means it was more corporeal than,
right.
phantom.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's like, to me, there's something stranger about that. And when they came back, it just wasn't there. Jeez.
Well, I got one more for you
Oh, okay,
from
let's hear it.
her. Okay.
Jeez.
This isn't about a cat, thankfully.
Thankfully.
So, she was writing in response to we were talking about when I felt friend, mentor kind of figure
Mm-hmm.
he died, and we both had that experience of him being in the corner. And she wrote that this experience wasn't really new to her. So her grandmother passed away of Lou Gehrig's in '97. It was a really terrible thing to have to
Yeah.
watch it all deterioration. And she writes that she and her were very close, and to this day, she remembers this freaky occurrence. So I'm just going to read from the letter now. I believe her funeral was the first I'd ever attended. I clearly remember my cousin and I approaching Graham's open casket. For some reason, we placed our hands on the edge of the casket like it was a railing, and we were peering over the edge at our grandma. Our grandma looked right at us in a ghostly way, a kind of a jerky movement like in movies with unstable film. And sure, this would be something that could be dismissed if I were alone, but my cousin and I looked at each other, and we were so scared. To this day, I cannot enter the viewing room at any funeral. That being said, I remember this as an interaction fondly now that I'm older. I'm not a religious person at all, but that look from my grand made me know that she would be looking out for me, and I still feel that way today. One would,
Jeez.
one would think with these memories that I would, quotations, believe in ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose I do, but not in a traditional sense. I believe in the power of the mind, and when we humans are confronted by intense emotion or by the unexplained, our brains just can't make sense of it, and we try to rationalize what's happening. Same thing happens with sleep deprivation. I really need to see something with my own eyes and take the time to understand what is happening in order to believe it. And despite being real or not, these otherworldly encounters can be explained by the intense, difficult feelings I personally experienced leading up to and surrounding them. So that is from Emily.
Jeez. So there's a lot going on there. I mean, one, I think she's right. I think that there is a lot going on, and I think that there's a lot of factors that go into a lot of these events. There's also probably a lot of things happening. When she said she doesn't believe in ghosts in the traditional sense, I think that's something that, people do talk about, but needs to talk about more is when we say ghost, that is even spirit, it is such a wide spectrum of phenomena that could be the result of many different things. So when she says she thinks that this thing that she saw was because of the power of the mind, I don't know if that is any less real or more real than it being from the spirit of her dead grandmother. Like where the agency or where the where it starts. So I think that she's probably onto something there.
Well, it's almost like saying that it wasn't the body of grandma making you see this. It wasn't the agency wasn't
Right,
there. The agency was in all the other interactions in a life that led to such a
right,
strong bond that in the wake of it you still
right.
see.
Right, exactly. And there's so much that goes into those interactions. And plus, like she said, that was like her first funeral. And I mean, no matter what age, I think that with open caskets and stuff like that, that can be traumatic for kids, for anybody. Seeing a dead body is not easy in general. And if it's someone you really, really care about, there's a lot of different ways that we can react to that are all valid. I'm by no means saying that people get freaked out by dead bodies of loved ones or people who don't get freaked out that that's better or worse, but there is a spectrum of experiences people have. And it's the culmination of a lot of other history, emotions, things like that. So I think that those moments, you're probably primed a little bit to have a interaction, whether you're generating it or it's coming from someone else.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that I mean the fact that her cousin had the same, saw the same thing, had the same impression.
That's the most interesting aspect about that. And I
Right.
don't know how much they talked about
Right.
what exactly did you see there?
Right, right. Because like we all know best practice, and this is just to say it out loud, if you are ever with someone else and you have a paranormal experience and you have the presence of mind to separate and document separately what you both experienced and then bring it back together, that is the kind of thing that paranormal investigators and enthusiasts like ourselves love.
Yeah, and you can do it at home. Well, we talk honestly. This is not a silly thing. Like, but anytime you have like a situation where you're like, what did we just see? Before you explain what you just saw to each other and corroborate a story that only then solidifies the singular. Walk away from one another. Pull out your phone.
Yeah.
Record yourself saying exactly what happened and then
Right.
play it for each other and then see if that
Right. Go
corroborates.
from there. Because we've talked about 1,000 times how unreliable eyewitness testimony is. And
Oh, and the
it's not a
more
bad.
time you add on that,
Right.
the less reliable it becomes.
Right. And that's not a dig at anybody or anything. It's just like generally speaking, people aren't good at that. And so that's why when you can at least document it, it's at least fresh at that point and hasn't been influenced by anybody else's opinions about what happened. I feel like we always have to talk about this whenever we mention this, but like we do hear stories about people having paranormal experiences and two people seeing completely different things, but both agreeing that like a thing happened. And again, yes, that does point to there being some element of subjectivity to these experiences, but I don't think that negates the experiences or says that they're any less real. Our lines between objective and subjective are much more malleable than what we like to think.
I'd have to think about all that statement a little longer before I'd be inclined to agree or disagree with you. But yeah, it is what it is.
Right, absolutely. And I think that I mean those experiences also, I'd be curious to know if her and her cousin felt any kind of like bonding around that because that's kind of a special thing. And it was a big event in both their lives probably.
Yeah, I think I mean, I wasn't around. I
Right.
think it was the way things are discussed. It seems to have been kind of a big moment in the
Mm-hmm.
course of the entire family.
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
like you said, it's kind of the culmination of a lot of things. I think that's a fascinating story either way.
hey, well, to wrap up, talking about fascinating stories, kind of to wrap up today. I mean, the last time we spoke, you remember my call to action, and I had to
Yes,
ask, did you listen to your UFO show?
I did on Monday, I believe, after gaming. Yeah.
Okay.
You were right. The bumper music, It's good.
Kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not the vibe that I expected, but you were correct about it.
What a really positive guy.
Yeah, yeah, and again, like the story, I wish I would have written it down because I was doing too many things at once. But yeah, he seems like a really nice guy, and I want to listen to more episodes. So, and I would encourage other people to do the same because that's how we get more stories. That's how he gets more stories, you know?
Well, and you'll hear a lot more of me because I've been calling him pretty regularly.
Right.
It's only a half-hour show. So
right.
Yesterday evening, I was the only caller, and I had to call in, and I kind of wanted to share this with everybody. So I called about this book. Now, I'm only about 20 pages into it. It's called 3 Minutes in June, The UFO Sighting That Changed the World. And it is by a doctor, Bruce Maccabee. Bruce Maccabee has a PhD in physics and was employed for years at the Naval Surface Warfare Center.
Jeez. Okay.
Seems pretty credible.
So, yeah, at least an educated gentleman. Okay.
I'm only 20 pages into it. It does get a little circular in that short time. But the couple big things. One, it's about the June 24th, 1947 sightings by Kenneth Arnold.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Which is the, watching discs go from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, being able to calculate the speed of the objects. And most famously, it's the sighting from which the term flying saucer is derived.
Yes.
Now, one of the interesting things that I was not aware of, and I called UFO Joe about.
Ooh, okay. Yep.
I had always assumed that the Big Bang in the UFO thing was Roswell. Always assumed that. Now we know we've heard there were the Foo Fighters in World War II, and people were seeing that sort of stuff. But it seemed to me that the catalyst in the UFO phenomenon was always Roswell, which also, unless I'm mistaken, happened in 1947, albeit a little later in the year. Apparently, that's not the case. Apparently, Roswell wasn't really much in the UFO folklore
lexicon, folklore.
Until like the 1970s. Is that so?
That's my, and again, I am not a ufologist, but that's my understanding as well. I only heard that maybe a few months ago for the first time. Can't remember where it was, but basically saying that there was we think that Roswell has always been a big deal, and it was a big deal back when it happened. And it really wasn't until like the late 70s, I think, that it started to gain notoriety. I have to do more research into it to find out if that's true or not. But what did UFO Joe say?
Oh, he said, well, yeah, because he's an older guy, and he said that. He said, because I think I said something about, I remember hearing about it on Unsolved Mysteries, which was a late 70s program, early 80s. And he said, yeah, and then, of course, there was do you remember the alien autopsy that they had on Fox? And
yep.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And it just kind of changed the timeline for me about how I think of these things. So it was just something that I was surprised that little bit of information wasn't better understood. That I just always walked away assuming that they tried to cover it up, but the cat was out of the bag, and whether it was a weather balloon or not, people were going to believe. Unlike with Kecksburg.
Right.
We know that out here, Kecksburg is a really big deal because it's just around the corner. And of course, some local authors that we're very fond of, Stan Gordon, that was very much a catalyst for him being a young person living in the immediate area. That was not so, and I kind of thought, well, that was in the 60s, and it was following a pattern that we see with Roswell. That pattern wasn't really well established because, again, at that time, Roswell wasn't very well known outside of an immediate area.
That's why a lot of those early UFO incidents, especially the crashes, that's why a lot of the eyewitness accounts and things like that, I think, are so intriguing, because I think it was a lot less in the cultural zeitgeist than what we think now. And again, I'm not a ufologist, let alone what's someone who studies historians? I'm like,
it bothers me kind of that you're so quick to say cryptozoologist,
I
and
know. Well,
ufologist, but historian was
historian.
just like outside.
The problem was that I went to say sociologist, but I was like, no. I'm like anthropologist, no.
Kind of,
Historian,
yeah.
yeah. But I don't think it was in as much in the prevalent in the culture as we think it was back then. But again, I know there are books out there, a lot of books and podcasts, and I'm sure movies and videos as well that talk about like the history of ufology, and that's something I would like to know more about. But so much of it seems just like so all over the place.
Yeah.
And I kind of don't know where to start. If you know where we should start, you should reach out to us.
How does one do that?
You can do that in a few ways. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook. Just look up the Ghost Furnace Podcast. Or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.